I'm going to spend a little bit of time preparing a butternut squash panzanella. Panzanella is a bread salad, and it's just the swing of the season right now, and I really love to pull these ingredients together. It's a warm salad, and it always makes me smile when I cook it. So I'm going to start with the butternut squash, trim it up, and I want to make sure that I've just kind of got whatever trim set off to the side, because I'll use that for a puree. I always keep my trim and let that be all in one spot so I can, use it for a soup or use it for something else. I'm going to cook the butternut squash sous vide, just because I think I can pack a lot of flavor into it, and it allows me to prepare more in advance and keep it on hand as necessary. Works really well for the line staff. Cut it a little bit smaller to make sure that it fits into the bag. And then I'm going to add some seasoning to the bag, namely some pecan oil. You could use almond oil or walnut oil, hazelnut oil. I'm going to add a bay leaf just because I always like the flavor that helps impart. And then I'm going to add a little bit of a lemon peel. Traditionally, I think here in the States, we tend to use a whole lot of cinnamon and nutmeg, and I really hate that at this time of year everything starts to taste that way. So I intentionally go in a different direction. Add a couple sprigs of fresh marjoram as well. I kind of like how that spins the flavor in a different direction. Now I'll put that all in a cryovac bag, seal that up. I've got my circulator running at 180 Fahrenheit, 92 Celsius, almost at a boil. It'll help cook the vegetable exactly how I want it, and it'll allow me to cook the apple at the same time. Next, I'll peel my apple. Make it a point to peel it thoroughly. I will add the peels to a granola separately, or even dehydrate them, and I'll turn those into a powder for something else. I'll definitely save them, but I'm not using them in this application. So I'll go through, I'll peel my apple, and then I'm going to cut that into a really fine granular. I like to take my fine granules and make a little bit of like stewed fruit with that. I get tired of everything being pureed. I think everything ends up with this soft, mushy texture, and with butternut, I don't need a puree. I think the squash itself, when it's cooked, has a really nice soft texture, and I want to make it a point to really just highlight that soft texture of the butternut, and then have a little contrasting texture from the apple. So again, I'm just going to go through, cut nice and fine, and then I'll seal those up in a bag as well. You can see that I've got a induction burner set up. I'm going to try and do this with as little space and as little equipment as possible. Try not to do anything too over the top, and just really cook tasty, simple, delicious food. can see in the vein off to the right, I've got a bunch of Evolve spoons and some little spatulas. Evolve is a company that I work with pretty regularly, and they help me by sponsoring a lot of my videos with the food product and providing me with a lot of equipment. If you're interested in knowing more, I have a lot of information in my bio where you can look into those products. I'm going to drop the butternut squash into the circulator. Keep cutting my apple. And those are the first two steps that I want to take because those are going to take the longest. Next I'm going to season them, a little bit of Himalayan sea salt. I'm going to add a piece of lemon peel just because I want a little bit of that fresh citrus flavor. And then I've got some bee pollen that I'm going to use to add a little bit of sweetness and kind of add a little bit of depth. I think, fresh bee pollen, especially really high quality stuff, kind of has a caramely quality to it. But at the same time, it's organic, it's natural. I really try not to cook with straight cane sugar, just because it offers very little nutritional value. Some fresh ground black pepper. And I'm doing that on the board so that it gets a chance to kind of, distribute the seasoning instead of it being all in one particular area of the apple. You'll see me fighting with the apple, trying to get it into the cryovac bag. Not the best first choice, but I always fold over my bags so that there's a nice clean seal. And that way there's no particulate in the bag itself when I go to seal it. And I find that then I get a lot less mis-seals or, misclosures. I'll seal that as tight as I can. And then give a quick wipe down. I always try and work as clean as possible. Once the apples are sealed, drop those in the liquid, and I'm going to set a timer for an hour. Next I'm going to pull together my vinaigrette. Vinaigrette is made up of shallot, so I've got 40 grams. I've got 40 grams of shallot. Brunoise really fine. And then I'm going to add pomegranate molasses. I've got sherry vinegar, which is really nice cask age sherry vinegar, olive oil, salt, pepper, and then I'm going to finish it with a little bit of pumpkin seed oil, which always adds a little bit of richness and depth to preparations that I tend to cook with butternut squash. I think butternut squash is a nice squash to work with. I think the top barrel part of it allows you a lot of variability in shape, but I don't necessarily know if it always has the greatest flavor. In order to reinforce that flavor, I always add a little bit of pumpkin seed oil to it. Take a little bit of fresh marjoram, pick them off the stem, and then just run the knife over it really quickly. And that'll help pull together the flavor that's already in the butternut squash. And then I'm going to use it again a little bit later with the apple. I try and make sure to marry the seasonings or bridge the seasonings from one component to the next. That way there's definitely some similarity. And I do that with the marjoram, healthy amount of black pepper, and then obviously a little bit of the pumpkin seed oil. So a little bit of pecan oil, again, same oil that was used with the butternut squash. Here's the pumpkin seed oil. It's very dark. I try not to go completely pumpkin seed oil because I think it turns really murky, really muddy, and it really darkens out a dish. And then in the fall, I definitely tend to be heavy-handed with black pepper. I just think it's a nice warming spice. It's got a really nice full flavor, and I really like what that does in the fall. Check the apples, see where they're at. I want texture, so I'm not trying to cook these to an oblivion, and just pull those out. Mix the simple ingredient, or mix the vinaigrette together. It's very simple vinaigrette, but bright with the shallots and very balanced with acidity with the sherry vinegar. And then in order to get the sweetness a little bit closer to in balance for me, I like to add a little bit of pomegranate molasses. I also think that it adds a nice consistency to the vinaigrette. You could definitely add pomegranate seeds to this if they're in season. I really enjoy the acidic pop and the sweet and sour balance that comes from pomegranate molasses. Definitely one of my fall flavors, my fall go-tos. Next, for the panzanella part, panzanella means bread salad. I'm going to take a piece of rye. You could use pumpernickel. Use sourdough. You can really use whatever bread you want. I like rye. Has a, I don't know, just has a nice texture. Has a great flavor that balances well. And part of where I've been as a chef, I think rye is one of those ingredients that's made it into my pantry, and it's a characteristic ingredient that I use. So I love to incorporate rye where I can. I'm going to cut really fine little brunoise croutons from the rye bread.
Can you please grab me like?
And then I'll use those
paper towel
later on in the salad for that bread component.
Can you plug that in too, please? Shit. Paper towel.
You want full paper towels or
Next, I'm gonna lightly, slowly let those fry in a really nice neutral sunflower oil. Sunflower seed oil.
with the rubber piece?
I'll add a little bit of those flavoring ingredients, a little bit of the marjoram, some black pepper. And that'll be one of the final additions on the plate. It'll add a nice crunch. It'll have a nice flavor to it. It'll definitely have some seasoning. Maybe like a salty, spicy kind of crunch that it adds to the plate. I try and warm the pan up a little bit ahead of time and toast the bread slightly. I then add the oil. The bread's going to absorb a fair amount of the oil if the pan's not hot, but I'm not trying to fry these. I'm trying to treat them more like a sauté. And then obviously that'll start rocking pretty quick, and they'll take color really fast if you let it. So I'm trying to go over moderately low heat to let the croutons toast and take the kind of color that I'm looking for, while at the same time not completely absorbing all of the oil and frying all the way through. I want to make sure I have my sizzle pan set up with paper towels ready to go. That way when my croutons come out, my little bread crispies, once they come out of the oil, I want to have a good landing pad for them so that they can rest, so that they can stop cooking. And then we're going to share that pan as well with a little bit of a granola type mixture that I like to add for my my panzanella, for my butternut squash salad. Just a few seconds longer. You can see the oil rocking away in there. Want to keep them moving though, so that way they don't get really dark on one side and they stay really light on another. I also have the herbs in there, and those will also serve as a guide as to how hot the oil is. If the herbs start to burn, then you're probably starting to burn the oil and your croutons aren't far behind. It's always a trick I use if I'm toasting pumpernickel this way, because pumpernickel is really hard to tell with how it colors in a saute pan.
Do you have another card ready?
And we just very quickly pull them out of the pan. Leave some of the oil in there. We're going to use that for the next preparation as well.
Force any of my bullshit on you. Any of my awful food. Any of the poison that I'm trying to kill you with.
We turn the pan to the heat, turn it back on. Add a little olive oil this time. That's extra virgin. I do like the flavor of that, but you want to be very sure that that oil doesn't get too hot or it'll get bitter. And then in with the pumpkin seeds. Sliced almonds. And then hulled hemp seeds. I just like to cook with hemp seeds. They have a cool texture. They have a nice flavor. And I like that they add protein too. I'm just going to let those ingredients all toast together.
Can you stop that?
Definitely not something you want to walk away from. This will get away from you really, really quickly. Everything in there is nice and thin. It's going to toast very quickly. It'll get away from you pretty quick too. Alternately, you could definitely do this on a sizzle pan in the oven if you wanted to. I like the flavor and I like the crunch that come from frying stovetop. I'm gonna add a little bit of pink peppercorns. It's gonna give a little pop of color, but most importantly, I love the fresh citrusy flavor of pink peppercorn. You can see that coloring pretty quickly, and we're going to pull it off the heat. Right onto our landing pad, and that's going to drain off while we pull the rest of everything together. You can see that I pulled the butternut squash out of the water. That's done. It took an hour and 5 minutes. And that's just going to rest. I want to keep that warm. I'm going to keep everything pretty much warm, just because I want this salad to be served above room temperature. I definitely think here in Georgia, especially now, it's a little bit cooler at night. Everybody kind of welcomes a warming salad. It's not so much time for cold, refreshing. Everybody wants a little bit of warmth. And these flavors really lend themselves well to these warm fall preparations. Make some space on my cutting board. Clear off my table a little bit. And then I'm going to cut my other apple. Start by peeling it again. You can leave the peel on. I tend to take it off just because, well, quite honestly, I just don't think it has the refinement that I'm always looking for. You know, the variety of the apple is definitely up to personal preference. These are galas, actually, and they came from local orchards, so they're really bright, flavorful. They definitely taste like apples, and I think that's what's more important than variety, is the fact that they taste like apples, that they have that, you know, that fresh, bright fall apple flavor. And alternately, you could definitely use Granny Smith's, but I don't necessarily want all the acidity or the texture. I would definitely want something that's going to taste like an apple, maybe something that would be good for a pie as well, so that it kind of has that, you know, delicious cooked apple texture, that delicious cooked apple flavor. I'm going to cut these into large dice. These are going to end up getting a quick saute with some dried fruit. So I don't want them to overcook, and I certainly want them to have a lot of texture, but at the same time still be able to take some caramelization. I'm going to cut these apricots into small pieces, about the same size as the apple. I'm aiming a little bit for rustic here. I'm not looking for super refined. Next, I've got some dried figs. And then I'm just going to cut into quarters or eighths, depending on how thick and how big they are. Could definitely use fresh. But for this purpose, I'm using dry. I like the burst of flavor, and I didn't see any fresh figs that I liked at the market. So I went with dried instead. And then I've got some dried cranberries that I'm not going to do much to. I'm just going to add them in. They'll add a bright tartness, a lot of sweetness. Unfortunately, dried cranberries here in the States tend to have a god-awful amount of sugar in them. But I really want them for their tartness and for that little pop of cranberry color that they tend to have as well. I'm going to add a little peel of lemon to it. When I saute these, I'll use a little bit of marjoram, salt, pepper. As you can see, I'm really doing a lot to not add any excess sweetness. I can't stand it when food gets overly sweet, and I tend to lean more towards acidic and herbal. So I'm going to go back to my neutral oil. That allows me to get to a higher smoking point. I really don't want to destroy the flavor of the apples using extra virgin. I don't want to, cook the pumpkin seed oil and throw the whole flavor off. So I want to get that pan really nice and hot because when I add the apples to it, I want to allow them to caramelize, like I said, and not really cook to a mash of, overcooked fruit. Add the lemon peel. I'm going to go back with some black pepper. Margarine. These are the apples that I cooked in the circulator a little bit earlier. They kind of have a ragu-like consistency to them, but they still have a lot of apple texture. I'm going to pull those out, put those into a little sauce pot so I can warm them back up if I need to. And just start pulling together all my mise en place so then I can plate this dish in the next couple of minutes here. And then I'm going to add my dried fruit, figs, apricots, and cranberries. And start shifting over my station so I can start to plate. You can see over to the top left the croutons that were made with the rye bread. And you have that little granola of the almonds, pumpkin seeds, and hemp seeds. Got my vinaigrette right above the knife. Little apple ragu, and then I've got these sautéed apples and dried fruit. A little seasoning of salt. Definitely lean more towards, salty, savory, and acidic. Next I'm going to shape my butternut. Now the butternut could definitely be a dice, it could be lightly mashed. It can, it could come in any way, shape, or form that you would like it. I just decided to go with a little crescent shape here for the sake of differentiation. It's got a little bit of rustic to it, so I wanted to add a little bit of refinement and try and kind of make a little mix of those things. Throw a lid on the fruit so it stays nice and hot. By the time I serve it, it's going to be, I guess, high warm, definitely not cold. The apples are sitting on the induction burner as well, and then everything else is at room temperature. And these butternut squash could definitely be cooled down in the bag and then reheated as necessary. I'm just going to go straight from the bag. The board, pull away the lemon and the marjoram. It's always a good idea to taste. Make sure you don't have to adjust seasoning. Try and taste as much as I can. Oh, shot.
get another battery. I'm hoping there's one charging in your office.
I don't think so. How much battery is left?
One bar.
Living dangerous there.
Now, the first time I had this salad, it was actually it was definitely a very rustic Tuscan dish with day-old baguette, large chunks of roasted butternut squash and pumpkin, and the whole dish itself was definitely a rustic mix, pulled together into a bowl and served in a really nice, elegant, rustic style. So I decided to refine this dish a little bit with a little bit of revision and a little bit of refinement to plate it and to show a different side of what a bread salad could be. So, you know, these little bits of trim, they can go into the soup. They could get folded into the fruit. Again, I just decided that I was going to, you know, play around a little bit and then have those half moons on the plate. It's always really cool when you can call your, your friend who makes plates for you and ask him for something a little bit different, like an inverted bowl or something like that. This is a piece of china from Connor McGuinn. Something that I had just asked him for, and he delivered this dish to me. So I love using it whenever I can. Next, I'm going to add the fruit on top of that butternut squash. Especially in the fall, make sure you warm your plate a little bit. Get a nice mix of the dried fruit, the apple. The dried fruit are going to soften quite a bit from the steam from the apples and help absorb any of the excess moisture that's in there. I still want them to be a little bit chewy, but they can definitely soften up. Stewed apples. And I'm just trying to layer and build the textures and the flavors as, as I want the diner to consume this dish. So next I'm going to add a little bit of that granola, little pops of seeds and flavor, texture, so that it's not all cooked fruit. It's not completely cooked squash. There's definitely some little bits of crunch and a little flavor of toasted nut and seed. Another piece of butternut squash. And I always like baby kale this time of year. It's hearty. It lasts. And then I'm just dipping that in extra virgin olive oil, getting a little extra seasoning on it. It'll give it a really nice shine, very deliberate. And I don't really want to mix the lettuce into the hot fruit, because that's definitely going to knock it down, cook it out quite a bit. This will hold up on top, but you got to serve pretty quickly. Yet another reason why I'm trying not to handle this salad too much. I want to make sure that it gets to the diner while it's still warm. Add the croutons on top. Make it an official bread salad. And since these are nice and small, they're going to absorb the vinaigrette on the way to the dining room. And that way they still have a little crunch, but then they still have a little bit of that, that vinaigrette that they've soaked up inside. So now I'm going to go back over top and I'll dress that salad with that vinaigrette. It's fairly aggressive vinegar. I would say that it's probably, you know, 2-to-1 olive oil to vinegar. So it's not, you know, straight vinaigrette, but it's definitely not as rich as you could make a vinaigrette. It's definitely more on the acidic side. And then I'm going to sprinkle some bee pollen over top. And that's the dish. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you.